No! No! Red Pen, come on back out. It's time to do a negative review. Aw man, why couldn't I stay upset just a little longer? This means I might do a moderate review, and I don't like this episode enough to be a moderate. If only a pony could fall through some kind of trap door or something just before doing a negative review so I could work off of them once they fall through the rift and save me!
Ouch! I have got to get someone to get rid of that trapdoor.
Buck? Oh, right. You actually have a trapdoor, don't you? Gotta love that self-fulfilling prophecy stuff.
Line space? Oh no. Don't say you liked some pony to watch over me.
I hated it! But my flames, they has died in a sugar-filled dream. Want some Kelcorn?
No thanks. I've seen enough movies to put me off that stuff for life.
Well, I need an angry pony for my review. How about helping me out?
Sure. Just don't be too moderate and kill my fury.
I don't do moderate well. A little too unbalanced for it. I'll go ahead and get started. I'll apologize ahead of time though, Buck. My reviews tend to jump around topic-wise. For once, I think I'll start off with the obvious though. What I thought of the Apple Sisters this episode.
It seems to me like they were trying to do Sisterhood Social with the Apple Sisters in this episode. The only problem is, they already did that in Sisterhood Social! We have seen plenty of these two getting along perfectly fine as sisters, friends, co-workers, and maybe even a little with Applejack acting as the mother Applebloom never had. Now they just throw all the previous development out of the window and have Applejack acting completely paranoid, not trusting Applebloom to do anything for herself, despite the fact she's seen her build a treehouse and crash a float down a cliff in the past. She's acting like she's just adopted her or something.
Well, okay then. Cut me right off, why don't you? I was extremely disappointed with the two of them this time around. First time, I thought AJ sounded high when she was acting motherly, and then I came to realize that her tone simply didn't sound the same as when she's usually worried. Mix it with the fact that her facial expressions and actions matched some pony who had gone over the deep end, better than the common sense workhorse we are used to, and I just couldn't find myself believing her actions. This was something that could have been fixed if there had been more time spent watching her progress, rather than jump straight to the maximum levels of paranoia, like what they did in Lesson 0 or Applebuck's season. Applebloom is apparently the sassy crusader, but I just found myself bored to tears with her unbelievably predictable responses and lack of personality in dealing with the situation.
You sound a lot more like you should be fairly upset. Why are you so moderate again?
My moderateness came after rewatching it. My hate of Applebloom rose a tiny bit when I remembered how much more she rebelled against her sister the one other time AJ has been overly protective, which was bridal gossip. Applejack, on the other hand, I can appreciate for the sake of fitting the character trope they were aiming for. Having previously established her tendency to go over the top, it fits that she would go to crazy lengths in protecting Applebloom. Mix it with her sense of responsibility and add a crazy level of motherliness to her personality, and you get a believable character interaction. However, this comes down to execution. Something they spent so little time actually doing with her overprotectiveness that it looks like she just flipped off the deep end doing a triple backflip.
The way Applejack is acting here is certainly this episode's biggest problem, and yes, the clear comparison to make here is with bridal gossip. In that episode, Applejack is more justified in wanting to protect her sister because she didn't know what Sakura might do to her, and then later she is unable to do anything to help her as Appletini, and she went off into the Everfree Forest on her own for Christ's sake. While here, she made a bit of a mess of the kitchen and Applejack instantly goes completely insane, baby-proofing everything. What's even more annoying is that there's a moment in the first act where Applejack basically admits to Big Mac that she's being silly, worrying about things like Applebloom needing to open drawers. And yet she doesn't seem to take this in. This problem is further compounded with the fact that establishing Applejack's being overprotective of Applebloom covers the entire second act. For about 7 minutes we get nothing but Applejack's paranoia, and we really only see one side of the issue as well. Going back to Sister of Social, in that episode we saw a good amount of development of both Sweetie Belle's and Rarity's issues with one another. While here, it's all Applejack. Applebloom gets maybe one scene on her own before she heads off on that delivery.
Before getting to forced dialogue, let's discuss the CMC this episode. Feeling a need to match Applebloom, I felt they were very plain this episode, not having much personality to themselves. The shocking part to this is that the filly who showed the most independence this episode as far as actions separate from the basic plot-controlled decisions was Sweetie Belle, a character I usually rip into for a lack of character depth or uninteresting actions. As some pony who only recently learned to control his volume level, I can relate to Scootaloo though, thinking she whispered to herself only to be told she was practically screaming. Would have felt a little more natural if it wasn't paired up with a long overdue and forced realization on Applejack's part, and a jarring kick to my suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, this is certainly one time when the other two were nothing more than Applebloom's sidekicks. but there have been many times before when the CMC are basically acting as one single unit, with maybe one of them leading and the other two following her lead, so I'm okay with that. I also thought the fake song was pretty funny, one of the few things I really liked about this episode. And then Applejack does a complete 180 on how she's been acting just because Apple Bloom is asleep. Okay. Only for that to be instantly dropped by Scootaloo yelling. By the way, how stupid was Scootaloo to yell like that? Who was she even talking to? The next scene does give a little bit of the other side of the issue this episode is trying to convey, being that it does help to take some precautions when doing dangerous tasks. But since Apple Bloom isn't even present, the scene is only a few seconds long, and Applejack has been so over the top with her protectiveness up until now, it's really not enough. And then from this point on, it just feels like a completely different story. The swamp setting and the Chimera just feel a bit out of place in a slice of life episode.
The Chimera. A monster I love, and one that killed me the second most times out of them all in God of War, is an MLP, and is retarded as hell! The entire conclusion to the episode with the fire swamp feels like total crap. The Chimera is supposedly starving after days of not eating, and spends more time talking than anything else. Mix that with the bullshit defeat at the hands of Applejack and some wonky animation, and I hate everything about this scene. Trying to pull the moral out right here was crap, and I would have much rather seen this time spent having Apple Bloom and Applejack both rising in their emotion. Apple Bloom getting progressively more rebellious against her sister's intentions, and AJ getting more protective until a massive confession leads them to an understanding. Pulling the moral out of its ass here with some force is hell dialogue after watching Apple Bloom almost get eaten and a monster get pinned to a tree is total bullcrap, since she showed how reckless she truly was. A perfect reason put Applejack on high alert for her sister regardless of how far along she got, not a good reason to trust her at home all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable how this climax manages to get pretty much everything wrong. The design of the monster is literally just three animals thrown together, and it's not even an original creation. This is something from Greek mythology. They don't even try to hide that by making the skin the same colour all over. Lazy animators. Lazy. Then they spend more time talking than they actually do fighting, bringing up irrelevant things like how much they hate having a sister watching over them. Applejack shows up and apparently defeats them by feeding the goat cheese. I say that because that is literally all she did. The snakehead and the tiger getting stuck happened on their own. What, did she know that was going to happen? The way things get resolved between the two of them is also pretty lame. Here we have a situation where Applejack is actually pretty justified in her being protective of Apple Bloom and not trusting her to look after herself. And this is where she realises her mistake. She didn't even witness those things Apple Bloom supposedly did to earn Applejack's respect. How did she know Apple Bloom wasn't just very lucky? The other problem with this ending is that it kind of implies that Apple Bloom was justified in going to these lengths to prove to Applejack that she could look after herself. There's a brief moment at the very end where Applejack mentions that this was a crazy idea, but I don't think it's really enough. It seems to sort of be sending the message to kids, hey kids, next time you want to prove to your parents that you can look after yourself, just go off on your own to perform a life-threatening task without the proper equipment. It doesn't even matter if you fail to finish the job. As long as you do okay at it, they will respect you.
Well, anything else we need to cover?
Well, it was interesting to see another town of ponies. In fact, it was remarkable how they were the main thing I remembered, given how briefly they were on screen for. I kind of wish the whole episode had been about them, really. So, as crappy as this story was, we actually do get a nice bit of world building at the end.
The Bayou ponies were excellent. They were an interesting touch, and I love the fact that at least part of the route is through a swamp, which makes them very believable and flow nicely with the rest of the conclusion. Well, let's get to fanboying.
Wait, what? I thought that was for episodes you enjoyed.
Sorry about that. I guess I'll be doing fanboying while you do editor's notes because, well, I'm not about to piss off Red Pen any more than I do by stealing his shtick. First things first, you can tell that Apple Bloom's voice has changed over the seasons, meaning that her VA will either need to be replaced or Apple Bloom needs to grow up some, and I definitely support the latter.
Well, I did think it was funny that they have a closet full of hats and bows. And I guess it does make sense, since those are the only clothes they wear regularly.
Having Big Mac say drawn out yup instead of goodbye feels like a bad joke.
I thought the helmet gag was a bit overplayed, but the final payoff with the double helmet was kind of funny.
So, Seabreeze was a dude last episode with the super squeaky voice? Okay, I can get behind that, but not the tiger's head being a chick. Work her voice a little less next time, please? Oh, wait, please, just don't bring them back!
Hey, when did Applejack learn teleportation? And while the idea for this episode was poorly executed, it is at least another reminder that the CMC are getting older, from the very first scene no less. But overall, this was just a bland setup with a lot of really dumb behaviour from Applejack and Apple Bloom. A second act that really dragged, and a third act that just felt out of place. The moral was not well presented or particularly interesting. For me, this was without question the worst episode of Season 4 so far.
Not even close to the worst episode of the season, but it wasn't terribly great. Entertainment hinges on whether or not you can enjoy AJ when it should have been an episode about her and Apple Bloom. I'll give it a 43 out of I'm not telling. Well, this is Linespace saying... Wait, did I forget to say hi? Well, this is Linespace saying hi and bye, every pony.
And this is Buck saying, get me out of here!